Hello and welcome. It's 9 o'clock. It's the 11th day of June 2021. I am your grumpy guide to all things gaming, the OGGM. We're playing around with OBS tomorrow. And why do I have a picture of Indiana Jones up on here? Because if adventure has a name, it's Indiana Jones. And today we're talking about adventure. Support me, Red Bull. All right. So the basic idea, GM tip here is adventures. Pre-written modules tend to be a problem because they end. And unless you're playing with a different group, once you run the Temple of whatever, the Iron Skull, and they go through Temple of the Iron Skull, and then they move on. And then now you're stuck with this adventure that you just paid, $24 for, and you're stuck with this chunk of property on your world, and you're like, okay, I ran this, and they're never gonna go back to it. So it just sort of leaves this hanging, and then what? And on the other end, of course, we have campaign settings, the Forgotten Realms, the DC Universe, Star Trek, whatever, where there's lots of things going on. But how many of those things are the player characters ever going to have an actual interaction with, unless it's directly in front of them? Then if it's directly in front of them, it's just an adventure, and an adventure's end. And then you're like, well, now what? Now, thankfully, as adventures have progressed and evolved, the writers have addressed these points often in some ways, some better than others. But as you can see the history of modules, you can see at some point they started including half a page, 2 pages, maybe an entire 3-page section of and thens or what ifs, dangling plot threads. Like, whatever happened to Professor June? We had an encounter with this NPC, the adventure moved on, but that NPC is still there, and that NPC might have motivations that we never investigated, or, well, Professor June's still out there, and it could be doing something else, and it could be positive, it could be negative. So here's a section in my adventure where I say, and then Professor June does this if the characters did this. But if the characters did that, then Professor June reacts like this. Or, if you killed Professor June, maybe Professor June's family gets all uppity and wants to go after you for killing Professor June. So some adventures have addressed that. And then we come to the current school of thought, which most people think, the perfect solution is controlled sandboxes. Designing adventures that are sort of written in such a way that things are going on that can be revisited. Bare minimum, they clear out the Cave of Doom. And then they go off and do whatever they're going to do. But the Cave of Doom is still there. That's still property that can be used. Logic says something will move in to the Cave of Doom. If we're talking modern day adventuring, well, some clever industrialist real estate guy will see that this is something that I can profit off of. I will buy this land up really cheap, or just take it over if it doesn't belong to anybody. And I'm gonna, rebuild it. I'm gonna do something with it. I'm gonna knock it over and put up condominiums and kick out everybody who's living in the Cave of Doom right now. I don't know what setting we're talking about, but that property doesn't go away. And for a long time, that wasn't really something we thought about. It's just they went into the castle, they leave, poof. They never go back, so the castle goes away. As the hobby has evolved, now people are like, well, the castle's still there, the cave's still there, the skyscraper's still there, the space station is still there. Somebody else could move in and reuse it, which means I could revisit this adventure but tell it in a different way. So the $24 I spent on this module, or $75 now with some of the stuff out, isn't wasted. But then my entire Sandbox campaign is still large, but it's controlled. Because let's face it, there's a lot of shit going on constantly in the Forgotten Realms. I mean, why would anybody want to live there? Literally every week some catastrophe is striking the Forgotten Realms of global Thanos level proportions, and it's up to 6 idiots to try and stop it. That's just too big. That's just too big. But if you have a sandbox, like an island is perfect. An island is perfect because unless they have a boat or a plane or magic or superpowers, they can't get off the island until you want them off the island. And you can tell an infinite amount of stories in this sandbox that is your island or your desert or your forest. And you can reuse pre-bought adventures by just using the, Professor June idea as your template. If they don't deal with this doesn't go away. This person, this artifact, this place, this series of events don't just simply vanish into the ether. They're part of your sandbox, which means they can be revisited. There's NPCs that they meet. Those NPCs don't have to be static. They can have lives, and they can do stuff that people would do, Going back to the cave. Well, now there's this cave a couple miles outside of town that is just being wasted. The adventurers have cleared the cave out of whatever was inhabiting in it that we sent them to do. Here's some available property we can do something worth with. What do I do with the cave? Well, I could start mining in the cave. I could store things in a cave. I could turn the cave into cheap housing. I could knock the cave down and build a condominium. Maybe there's sections of the cave that the adventurers forgot about and I don't know, or never went to. And now I'm going to send somebody else to go check that section out, which leads to a whole different adventure. And yeah, if you could reuse the settings so you didn't waste $25, $75 for that book you bought, because you look at it not as a one and done, you just look at it as a blueprint. And once they go through it, there's dangling things that they probably didn't address. I mean, Hamlet. How many times can you retell Hamlet simply by changing things up? You can do Hamlet, then you can do The Lion King, which is Hamlet, then you can do Star Wars, which part of Star Wars is Hamlet. You can do lots of stories, and then you realize that story is Hamlet. That story is Romeo and Juliet. That story is The Great Train Robbery. That story is Ocean's 11. That story is Temple of Doom. You just retell it and reskin it in a different way. So that book you bought isn't wasted. Structured sandboxes, I think, personally, and maybe I'm wrong, are the perfect setting. You have a self-contained universe, but it's small enough that every story you can tell actually matters, and there's nothing going on in your sandbox that doesn't matter. If the great disaster in Mount Zubilu is part of the vast campaign setting that is the Forgotten Realms, and you just bought the Great Mountains of Zubilu disaster module, but it's 20,000 miles away from where your party is now. You either start a new adventure over there, or you're like, well, great, I bought this and I'm stuck with it because they're never going to go to Mount Zubilu. If I was clever, I'd move Mount Zubilu to them and rewrite it so it would actually affect them where they are. But the Forgotten Realms is fucking huge. An island, a sandbox, is smaller. You can control what's in a sandbox, but still leave it open-ended enough that they have the illusion of freedom to go wherever they want and look into whatever they want and make, sidetracks like, hey, whatever happened to Professor June? Maybe we should go check on that person and see if they're okay. Hey, you remember that cave we cleared out? Well, now I'm a high enough level to build a wizard's lab, right? That cave would be a perfect spot for me to be a wizard's lab. Or, oh, I'm a dwarf and I have a Scottish accent and no one knows why I have a Scottish accent, but I'm going to go back to that cave and finish mining it, eh? That's Canadian, not Scottish, but you know what I mean. Anyways, there's just some DM thoughts for your Friday. If you appreciate this content, let me know. If you don't appreciate this content, let me know. If you're in Ventura County and near the Pacific View Mall, they have the drive-through dinosaur experience at the Pacific View Mall. I'm going to go check it out later today. And I'll have some pictures of it. So, yeah, go check it out. Dinosaurs. What's cooler than dinosaurs? Talk to you later.